That's how I learned. There's a lot of great photographers out there, a lot more equipped to teach the tools and such. So we're going to go through a lot of these concepts. They are tailored to Lightroom and Photoshop, but they do apply to any post processing. So before we go on ahead, I forgot I like to give a little intro just about myself. Um, my name is Caleb Hoover. I live in Sarasota, Florida, actually, so I'm not too far away from you guys. Um, I started birding when I was around 8 years old, and just eventually I grabbed my mom's camera and decided to try to take pictures of the birds, and that has taken me places I didn't think I'd ever be. So, and like standing here, sitting here in front of you guys. So it's pretty. So I appreciate you guys having me on, and hopefully we can have a good presentation. So we're going to go ahead and go to the first slide. So first of all, if you don't use an editing software, there are definitely benefits for editing. Not just editing's not all about changing photos and making them unrealistic. There's a lot more to it. First of all, you'll find that when you take a photo and you compare it to the scene you're looking at, a lot of times you'll find that it's not an exact representation of what you were looking at, especially with raw files. They really mute the colors and just they're not ideal. So another thing that goes along with compensating for your camera is underexposure and overexposure. You won't always get your exposure right, and sometimes you'll blow highlights, sometimes you'll crush your blacks on accident, and it happens, especially shooting manual. So it's editing is I mean, the basic level is just to compensate for the camera. Another benefit is you can draw more attention to your subject to make your image pop in like this burrowing animal, for example. The original file, pretty much the roots of that edit was just all about bringing attention to the bird, and it's sort of the step up from just compensating for your camera, and it's a good approach to editing. Anyways, also enhancing the mood of your photo. It's taking it to the next step a little bit. Enhancing the mood of the photo, it can have to do with color, light, just the overall enhancement of the elements you're seeing. And we'll dive into all these topics. This is just sort of an outline of what we're going to be talking about. And also reducing distractions. There will be a slide about cloning and not exactly how to do it, but the principles to keep in mind when cloning and removing distractions and objects. And also adding an artistic flair. Every photographer takes pictures differently. So every photographer is going to edit differently. And it really is, there's no right or wrong way to edit. And so it's really up to the individual photographer to find their own artistic flair in how they do things. And also you grow quicker. And that will be expounded on, how editing can help you grow as a photographer. That's a really interesting part of the presentation I'm looking forward to. So on to the next slide. Let's talk about personal styles for a little bit. I've had the privilege of meeting up with a few amazing wildlife photographers and going out shooting with them. And the thing that always surprises me when you're going out shooting with someone, you both look at the same bird, especially with like owls and stuff. They don't move. So you'll just be sitting there shooting the exact same subject, exact same positions, but two photographers can come out with completely different frames. It's just the most interesting thing because everyone's mind works differently and they analyze scenes differently. And a lot of the stylization isn't just how you take the photo and what angle, but it also has a lot to do with editing because everyone processes their images differently, even if you come up with the same raw file. So similar gear, same opportunities, you can see very different results, and that carries over into editing. And for instance, here's a snippet of my Instagram feed I just screenshotted from my phone. And the reason why I include this, because if you look at anyone's gallery, you see consistency throughout their gallery of a specific, everyone has a specific flair to their work. And there's just an example of my work, but everyone has their own flair. And a lot of that, the final product of images, has a lot to do with editing with photographers. Not necessarily just changing your images around to look a certain way, but it goes back to the photography aspect, but the overall look has a lot to do with editing. And it's also important to figure out what you're comfortable with editing, but we'll talk about that later. Also, this is an interesting illustration of this point. This is a Chuckbull's widow, one of my favorite birds. I shot this photo on a Canon T3i, pretty much one of the last pictures that camera ever took, actually, before it bit the dust. But that's the raw file on the top left, and I had 3 different photographers edit the same raw file. I sent it off to them just to see what they did. And those are the 3 results I got. I ended up posting a different an edit I'm not very proud of that photo, but it just shows to show how it's the same raw file, the exact same starting point, but 3 photographers took it 3 different directions. So it's really a personal path you have to take with editing. You have to figure that out through trial and error, what your approach is. So that's just a fun little graphic I put together. And editing, it can be really a great creative outlet, but a lot of times with images, I've been sort of straying more towards this recently, is taking a bit of a more conservative approach. It's nice to take an image and not to do much with it editing wise. It's rare with a lot of images, just the raw files just don't come out the way you want. But whenever it does happen, it's a lot of fun. It's a very satisfying feeling. Anyways, so this slide is dedicated to compensating for the camera. Basically adjusting your file to the actual scene you stood in front of. No real creative spin on it, per se. Sorry. This, for example, this white ibis here, I took it from my car window. And if you notice, the blacks are really crushed in the photo, and the highlights are just a little bit, they're really not where they should be. They kind of feel out of place in the frame. And this was with a kit lens. So I entirely blame the gear in this situation, which I shouldn't do, but I'm going to go ahead and do. But it's an example of very sort of a more conservative. Sorry if someone unmuted. All right, we're better now.
Did you just go in there?
Yeah.
We're getting some pretty bad reverb.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're better now. All right. So sorry about that, guys. I'm not sure what that was. Anyways, so this ibis image is really a prime example of a conservative approach to editing. It's all about trying to get your image to the scene you stood in front of. And after processing, and that is sort of what I stood in front of, is a softer light. And the idea behind this approach is just to make the image as natural as possible. And there's some slides that will go into what really is a natural frame in the future. So it's a more conservative and reasonable, you could say, approach to editing for someone just trying to get into it. What I sort of consider this a step up is drawing attention to your subject, taking a few more creative liberties with your images. This style, just drawing attention to your subject through editing, it works best with portrait style images, but really no 2 images are the same, so it doesn't just apply to portraits. This is an Ipswich sparrow photographed in New Jersey, and a summer tanager photographed in Tennessee. And the sparrow, it utilizes lights and darks to highlight the bird itself, whereas the tanager uses color contrast. It's less of it doesn't have as much dynamic range in the image, light and dark wise, but it is a very it pops because the contrasting colors of the tanager. So it's important not to cross a line when you darken or saturate with these images, because I mean, tanagers, vermilion flycatchers, cardinals, reds for some reason just fry camera sensors, and you have to really know when's too far when you're saturating, when you're drawing attention to your subject, because it's so easy when you're really trying to highlight a bird to go over the top. And this Ipswich sparrow, for example, it was really important to figure out, since it's an overcast scene, obviously, based on the light, how much white, your eye is naturally drawn to lighter colors, so how light could I make the bird as opposed to the dark background without it seeming out of place? Considering Ipswich sparrows are, they're definitely not white by any means. And notice this list of tools in the middle. If you're unfamiliar with these tools, I'd recommend taking a picture of that list. Like I said, this presentation isn't about the tools of Lightroom and Photoshop, because that would take a lot more time than we have to go through. And it's all just like an artistic touch to it. So I'll leave that one up to YouTube and people more experienced than me. But these tools are the main tools I use for selective editing, especially when it comes to bringing out your subject, like these two photos. This is a pretty interesting graphic. I found a new tool in Lightroom that I made this graphic with. I'll show what it is in a second, but the versions tool in Lightroom, pretty cool. If you've never used it before, you can see the different versions of your edit. So anyways, I'll show you what I'm talking about here. So notice as I'm clicking through this, how the color and light are sort of built up to bring attention to the birds. I'll give about a couple seconds in each frame.
Those sounds are not coming from you, are they, Caleb?
No, quiet on my end.
You're
Okay.
mute, Nancy.
Nancy, tell everybody to mute.
Yeah. I hope everybody can hear me. There's some background noises coming out, so I'd appreciate if everybody checked and made sure that they were on mute. Thank you.
So that was just I'll just go through these those owls again for a second, just from the
Great.
start. Just what I was saying is to I use the, what was it called, the versions feature to compile these different edits from start to finish. That's the raw file to the final product. But it's all about, with this specific edit, it was all about lights and darks and color contrast to bring out the owls. I'll just pan through these again. Definitely one of my more you could say over the top edits, but I'm proud of it. But yet again, these tools on the left, feel free to take a picture of those if you're unfamiliar. Those were all the tools used to get to that point. But like I said, it's not all about the tools, this presentation. It's more about the theory behind it. We're going to get more in depth as we go on. So now we're going to talk about a slightly more artful approach to editing, focusing on mood. Of course, you can build up on these as you work on an image, but sometimes when I'm working on an image, I like to focus on enhancing the mood of an image. And personally, I don't ever add a mood that isn't already there. And you'll see what I mean by that with these sandhill cranes. Is once again the raw file. And it's important to discern for yourself, as a photographer, how far you're willing to take an image. Some people get a little up in arms about how far is too far with editing, and I mean, everyone has their own stance, and it's really important to figure out, what you're fine with, what you're maybe, or when it's just, in your opinion, just better to go out and reshoot it as opposed to try to recover it with an edit. So I don't like to add a mood that isn't already there. And I'm just gonna pan through yourself. Sorry, I've read a word. Pan through these cranes here. So see a bit what I'm talking about by building on a mood as opposed to adding a mood. And I went through a bit of on each of these pan throughs. You'll see I took different directions. I would bounce between different ideas until finally coming to the more desaturated final product. And that's really how I remember it in my mind. And let me just pan through those again. You'll see how I kind of bounce through edits. So I built up the colors a little bit, went a little over the top with the selective edits, but then brought it back down a little bit. Kind of went over the top with the aquamarine. I had to step away from my computer on this one because I was really going over the top. And when I came back, I dropped the sort of lowered the mood a little bit, kept some of the lighter spots, kept that stormy feel, and overall, that's sort of what I mean by enhancing the image's mood and impact. So now we can, now that we have that out of the way, editing, it's not always like a linear approach. Sometimes certain images they really take playing around with. Like this one, for example, you saw each of the one with different directions from the next, until I finally got the final product. And some images are just like that. You can sometimes you'll get an image and you'll edit it and it only lasts. You'll finish it in 30 seconds and then you're done and you didn't have to do much. But some of them they really take work to just to get it right, just to get it where you want it, to where you remember it in the field. So and especially with editing wide angle images, if anyone's ever tried to use selective editing and go really into the details with a wide angle image, editing it is a pain. It is the worst. And a lot of times I end up leaving an image and I might return to it for months later, just with a different perspective on it, and I'll grab it out of the ash heap and re-edit it because my ideas change, my perspective on something changed. Maybe I'll have a bias of just because I recently shot the image, I remember the scene very vividly, and maybe my mind's a little askew. So it's important to sometimes step away, get different perspectives, maybe send an image to someone another photographer, and they can give a what's the word? Advice on it. That's something I've found very invaluable is sending around images to other photographers just to get advice on, especially with edits and stuff. They're tough. All right. Because, in the end, all that really matters is you're happy with your own image. That's really the end game. So continuing with the topic of mood, this is such an important topic that I put 3 slides for it. Mood, it's just so important with editing. But as you work on our images, trying to reach their potential, it's so easy to get carried away, like you saw with that aquamarine crane edit. It was just so bad. But you want to reach the image's natural potential without getting carried away. It's so easy to get carried away. And you have to really remember that it has to make sense organically with your images. Of course, you can go crazy with it, and no one's going to judge you for it if that's your style. But typically, most wildlife photographers tend to choose a more a subtle approach to editing. So that's basically what I'm encouraging, but not pressuring. This is a very important topic. With an image like this, I want you all to look at these 3 versions of the same image, and I changed the shaded regions on from the natural version in the bottom 2. The natural version, it's the edit in the top left that is the closest to what it was in person. I compared some cell phone photos to get that edit as close as possible. And the whole point of this is that these 2 bottom ones, I changed the shadows and blacks on them. So the light itself is the same in all of them, but the shaded portions are all different. So technically, the bottom 2 are wrong, but at the same time, it's an artistic expression. So you want to keep in mind that maybe it may be not what it was naturally, like these bottom 2, but if it makes sense, enough sense, to where it seems realistic, then why not run with it? So I ended up just going with the more natural edit, but you have to find the balance between taking a little bit further sometimes and knowing what's maybe too far, what's maybe a little bit unnatural feeling, because it's up to you. but a lot of times people do choose to go with a more a natural edit. Actually, I have one more slide on this. One more image to wrap up this point. I chose this image. It more drives home the point of the last slide. It's when you look at this image, it's a very two-colored image. I mean, a lot of the tones are pretty much either a pale yellow or blue. It's really one or the other. That's why I chose this image for this particular part of the presentation. Now, the point I'm trying to make with this is that if you were to change one part of the image, for instance, the blue around the bird, if I were to change that shadow, make it slightly darker, or more purple, or more green, slightly tinted, then it would start to contradict the other shadows around the image because they're technically the same shadow, just cast from the same light source on the same beach. So it's important to remember consistency, that your image has to be consistent with light and shadow, or else a photographer will, another photographer, someone seeing it might catch it, may look at it, and it would really distract them from the image. So it's important what you do to one part of the image to do to the other, because a lot of times images have consistencies throughout that you have to maintain. And this, I'm going to go ahead and completely expose myself here. That was a terrible edit I did years ago. This is an older image. Obviously I didn't know what I was doing, but the purples itself, when you first look at the image, is an actual edit I did. But when you look at the image, considering the light coming from the top left, the shadows and the light spots on the beach simply don't make sense. And although technically could be construed as an artistic approach to it, it is important that it's consistent. It makes sense with the light, because this definitely does not. So it's something that I always look back on my images afterwards. Did I take it too far? Maybe I took it too far in this direction. Maybe I need to bring it back a little bit. So consistency is very important, because I've seen many photographers sometimes miss out on that in certain images, and it just distracts from otherwise amazing images. So remembering what's natural, what makes sense, and if you do one thing to one part of the image, do the same to the other. So this section here, it's a more visual and fun aspect. We're gonna go through these 4 images here. The gallinal image in the bottom middle, the eggs bottom left, and then the clapper rail, the palm warbler, and the gnatcatcher. And what we're gonna look for is this this key phrase here: bring out what you like and push back what you don't like. That phrase is pretty much exactly what that's the mindset I always have when I'm editing, is to bring out what I like and push back what I don't like. And once I go through a checklist of things I like, things I don't like, a lot of times I find that I'm done with an image. I'm happy with where it is. So it's a technique I use for editing that I would very much highly recommend, is that phrase there: bring out what you like and pushing back what you don't like. But you'll see what I'm talking about within the next couple of slides. We'll see the raw files, and we'll examine what things we like in the images, and then I'll show you the finished product just to see how those all kind of fit together, so you can see the why it's so beneficial to look at what you like. So for our first raw file, this is the Kami Gallinal. I called this image Island of Life. The story behind this image, I was at a local park that I had shot for a few years, and these Kami Gallinals would always, I'd see them around June. They would lay their first clutch, and then around in between June and September, they'd have 3-4 clutches. And I was just wondering where their nests were, because it's a very small urban lake in the middle of the city. I mean, there's large buildings all around, but I was wondering where the nests were. So I finally saw a nest out in the reeds, And I thought that was just super cool. They were in the middle of this urban environment. There was a playground next to me. So I pulled out my wide angle lens and I waded out into the water once the female had gone behind a tree to go feed. So there were no birds around to be stressed or anything. So I took a few wide angles and I didn't have much time to compose and all because I didn't want to stay for too long. So I darted back up to the shore. It was the raw file I came up with. So going on back to the editing portion, when I first looked at this image, the things that really stood out to me were the slight blue hues in the water and the green hues together with them. And what I found interesting about that is that they almost felt like a map of the world, how the algae and the water kind of came together. And I thought that was just the most interesting thing. And when I edited it, I really wanted to bring that out. And another thing that I noticed that I knew I had to incorporate in my edit was that the eggs. It had a really nice orb shape to them, and I thought that was just the most interesting thing. How, with all the clutter and all of this nest, and how the water's smooth and there's clutter, but then there's these orbs in the middle, and that's what really brought them to my attention was the slight shadows and the slight light spots on them. So I knew that I was going to have to bring those eggs out somehow in post processing. And the next part is just look at things you don't like. Sometimes, well, a lot of times, this list of things you don't like will actually be a lot longer, things to push back. But some things I didn't like, just looking at this raw file, was that the nest itself is significantly lighter than the eggs, the rim of the nest, and your eye sort of bounces between the eggs and the rim of the nest, and that's really not what I want in an image. I want what I really look for, and something I use to guide my edits is to basically manipulate where the viewer's eye goes and be able to control that with lights and darks. And another thing is a slight off-centeredness. I obviously didn't have enough time to compose to get an exact centered crop, but I felt like it was slightly off center. And if I'm going for a centered, like a cradle feel, I'd want that to be an exact centering. So I knew exactly what I was going to do with my crop just based on that. And there's a few layered sticks. This will come into play in a future slide about distractions. Some of these reeds extending out, they break up the cradle feel. Some of these larger water plants. So that's another thing that I just knew that I had to change in the edit. So now we're gonna see the raw file, just see what we got from all that. Those were pretty much all the rules I used to get to the final product. Just looking at what I like and what I don't like, and trying to bring out what I like and push back what I don't like. So raw file to finished product. As you can tell, the blues were brought out a little bit. Not too much, but it was a blue sky day, so obviously they should be more blue than they were in the raw file. Some slight cloning was done. I'm sure you noticed when it faded out. And the eggs, obviously the shadows were dropped down a little bit, and the highlights in the eggs were brought up. And when you look at the image, your eyes are instantly drawn to the eggs, and kind of your eyes swirl around the image a little bit afterwards. So with lights and darks, you can manipulate where a person's eye goes. And I just think that's the coolest thing with editing is it is a creative thing, and it is a lot about what you want to do with an image. But at the same time, you can take into account how your average viewer would look at it. And you can use some aspects of that to adjust your image. So that's the let me go see if I can go before and after with that. Just a couple times back and forth. Just sort of see. Obviously, I'm not going through the exact tools and stuff, but it's just the general principles behind editing is what we're going over here. So now we're going to go on to the next raw file. oops, whoops. This is a palm warbler in some fall foliage. This was actually taken here in Florida, and the only tree I really ever find that loses leaves and changes colors is or the maple trees. So as soon as I found a patch of maple trees, I spent about a week or so just shooting in the maples. And this palm warbler is one of the images I got in some fall colors. This spot I actually saw going out to another birding spot. I was just driving along and I noticed a field off to my right. It was kind of an open field and the backlight was catching it nicely. So I decided to maybe give that spot a go. And it ended up having a marsh attached to it with maple trees along the borders. Ended up being an awesome spot, but that's where I got this palm warbler. But what I knew instantly I wanted to do with this image was to bring out the fall feel more than anything else. I wanted to emphasize the fall colors because it's just something I never get in Florida. It's always palm trees and pine trees and oak trees, and it's nice to have some fall colors. So in that respect, some bias does come into play with my editing when I edit images. But going through the things I like, things I don't like list, I first look at the image, the yellow on the bird, how it complements the yellows in the leaves. That's something that just grabs my attention right away. And also those slight orange hues in the leaves. It's not just yellows and greens, but the orange hues and the slight red hues. I mean, it adds a pop to the image that wouldn't be there if it's just all yellow, you know? And another thing is the bird has slight catch light. And for a small bird, getting a catch light is just everything with an image. That's that little that's the reflective where the light reflects off the eye. And I knew that in order to bring out that catch light, you can only brighten it to a certain level before it becomes unnatural. So I knew pretty much instantly when I was editing this that I wanted to collapse the crop to bring out that catch light a little more because it'd just be larger in frame and easier to see. Some things that really didn't hit me with the image were the stick in the top left. Especially with shooting songbirds and such, you're moving so fast with your camera that a lot of times you don't have enough time to consider all the frame elements. And that's a huge thing with photography, is being able to really be in control of your frames at all times. And editing, it can make up for some errors sometimes, but being able to have full control of what you're doing at all times is so important. Like for this image, for example, if I had the knowledge that stick was there and really noticed it, I probably would have moved over a little bit to the left to get it out of frame, just enough. But it's yet again, it's just something that you got to live with. Another thing that didn't really hit me with this image was the green hues. And like I said earlier, I really wanted to bring out the orange hues in the edit, the oranges and the yellows and the reds. But the greens sort of detract from that. It detracts from the feel of the photo and takes it out of that fall feel. But I knew that I couldn't change the hue of the greens to yellow. So what I could do is minimize the trying to think of the word, how much the greens stood out. I could limit that and how your eye really doesn't go to them. It might sort of blend over when I'm done. And that was really the goal. And also another thing that didn't really hit me was how soft the bird was. It doesn't really stand out in the frame because there are darker elements in the frame than the bird and lighter elements in the bird. So the bird itself kind of gets caught up in the leaves and doesn't really stand out. So that's something I really knew I needed to change. And another thing is, we'll talk about cloning and object removal in a second here, but the little sticks branching out towards the bird and around the bird, just the little ones, I personally am totally fine with doing a little bit of cloning, but I knew that taking those out would definitely draw more attention to the bird because those are also detailed and have some sharpness. So they obviously would attract your attention. So I knew I had to take those out. So let's see the after. So obviously I went for a tighter crop, and the purpose obviously being to take out the stick in the left. But the green hues, if you look closely in the bottom left and sort of all around the image, are still there to some degree. But in Lightroom, you have a feature to select certain colors and change the hue. And that's what I did with that one, is just to not to get rid of it because I wanted to keep it somewhat natural, but to bring it up to where I wanted it, to where it all blends together. The orange sort of balance out the greens nicely and make it sort of a sheet of yellow with your eye. And tighter crop also brought out that catch light. If you look closely in the photo, I mean, it has just a great catch light for a little bird. The overcast conditions, they work well in the situation. And some other things that I adjusted were the bird itself, using some selective edit features like the list earlier with the dodging and burning, and subject select and brush and linear gradient, radial gradient. I use those to sort of to bring out the yellows of the bird's chest, because that having some colors in your subject, in your background, melds it in some weird way. It melds it a little bit, but also helps it to stand out. So that's something I did, is brought out the first of all the barring in the Warbler, but also the yellows. So I thought that'd be an important aspect of the edit. That one's a little bit more straightforward. It's a more portrait style shot, but the mood itself is, the feel of the fall feel was very much enhanced. But it's obvious how things were pushed back. Some things were even cloned out. See if you can spot what's cloned out in the image. First of all, there's that one stick right across from the bird getting cloned out. I don't tend to clone things that large, but with such a small subject, it really it detracted a lot from the image. So I felt like that had to go. Just overall, bring attention to the bird, highlighting the fall feel, a linear thought process when it comes to editing. And our third image, we've got 4 total. This little gnatcatcher was what I call a just an opportunistic shot. This little guy, I was shooting along a waterway, and had some gnatcatchers. It was at a park in town. I actually visited it this morning. Great park, a lot of meadowlarks, but these little guys were all over the place. And I shot maybe 100 frames of these along this waterway, but I got into this forested area, and there was this patch of Brazilian pepper trees with various bushes around them, and these were attracting bunting and tons of gnatcatcher, palm warblers, yellow rump warblers. It was just a frenzy of birds. And there's this one perch that was nicely sunlit, and this little guy was bouncing to it and back and forth. And if you guys have ever shot gnatcatchers, you know they are terrible to try to track. They're not as bad as kinglet. Ruby crown kinglet, I think, are the jumpiest birds on planet Earth, but gnatcatchers are pretty bad too. So this little guy was just bouncing back and forth. So I was really happy to at least pull down 1 frame, even if it is slightly underexposed, of this little guy. But interesting thing about this frame is because the light was dabbled so much, the bird's throat area is overexposed, whereas the image itself is underexposed. So it's a tough dilemma when you're editing, is having a lot of dynamic range trying to collapse that. And you can see just a slight catch of light in the bottom of its perch there. It gets a little bit brighter, and I felt like that distracted a little bit. So going through the list again, things I like, things I don't like. The yellow bokeh trailing in from the bottom right, I think that's just an awesome touch. Since it's such an opportunistic shot, just swinging around and shooting, there was obviously not a lot of planning going on, so I got really fortunate with that one. But the bokeh trailing from the top right, it's something that I knew I had to bring out in the final product, something I had to enhance in some manner without going over the top, since it is softer bokeh. The orange patch behind him, I would have really preferred the orange patch to be in front of him. It's something, if I were to shoot it again, I definitely would have moved over in the moment and shot it with the orange in front of him, because it is a nice frame element, but it does take your image towards behind the bird. You don't always want that. One other thing I liked was the blue on the bird. They are called blue-gray gnatcatchers, and they definitely have nice hints of blue in them. Combined with the shadow itself, I thought that brightening this image, sort of going for a more cheerful feel, a spring kind of look, would be very cool. So the blues on the bird, the bokeh in front, and the orange behind, my favorite aspects of the image. And overall, it's underexposed. I knew I had to change that. But some things I disliked, probably the equally important list, is the branch intersecting with the tail. I try to never have aspects like with an image like this, trying to have any relatively in-focused elements intersecting with the bird, because I do find that it distracts from the image. It's something that I should have changed in the field, moved around a little bit, but you're going to have problems like that all the time when you're shooting. So I knew that was a little bit distracting, and I wanted to clone that out. The underexposure, obviously, I mentioned. I knew that I was going to change that, and the bright parts of the perch, I thought could use some lowering, and also the bright throat. It's just borderline overexposed. But if I overall change the image, brightened up a little bit, it should level that out. So let's see what we did with that. That's the final product. Obviously, this zoom, the colors are slightly askew from what they looked on my when I was editing it, and it's slightly brighter, I think. When you spend time on an image, you really know it like the back of your hand. I don't mean to nitpick, but it does seem a little bright here. But anyways, so the blues definitely got brought out with the gnatcatcher. I used a new tool in Lightroom called Subject Select. It's not always perfect, but it is a very impressive tool. It allows you to select your subject with an AI, and if it does make any mistakes, you can use the erase tool to take those away. But with this image, with such fine detail, I used that in the bird. Subject selected the bird and then made any adjustments with the general adjustments feature. Obviously, that stick intersecting the tail is no longer there, so that's pretty cool. And the trailing bokeh, I brought that out with just the general brush tool. Since it's out of focus, it's not a precise. It's not in focus. I just took a general brush tool with a light feather. If you don't know what those terms are, you can put those in the chat box, and I'll explain those in a second. Once we're done, but yeah. So this particular image, it was a very straightforward edit. Go back to the beginning. I cloned some stuff in the bottom right there. Obviously, not trying to get too technical with this, but overall just show the thought process behind certain images, so then you can get a general idea of the thought process, which is much more important than any other aspect. One more back and forth. I cloned the slate, a little seed pod coming in from the top. All right, so on to the final one of this, and then we can get on to the most important part. This is a very important, a very special image to me, is the raw file. This is a clapper rail, and clapper rails, they have a pretty good presence here in Florida. Up in the marshes in Tampa, there can be hundreds of them in specific areas just calling, and they're doing decent as a population in the area. But in my area in Sarasota, there hadn't been a sighting of them in 6 years, and I was kind of disheartening, because I really wanted to see a clapper rail at some point. But one time I was at the beach. It's a sort of interesting story. I was at the beach and I went with my parents one day, and I was shooting a peregrine falcon, just taking a couple ID shots on a hotel. And my dad calls me over, and he said he saw a what looked like a rail. He's pretty proficient with his birds. He knows his birds pretty well, so he knew it could have been a rail when he first saw it. And so he says it's in a bush, and I'm like, rail? There's no way there's a rail. There's no species that are coastal that are in the area. It's at the beach and sand dunes. Like, what are you talking about? So we wait around for a second, and I see this little bit of movement. So I point at my camera and I track it for a little second. I think it's a rabbit. So I just see the back of it. I just see like a top brown moving through, thinking it's a marsh rabbit. And out comes a clapper rail. And it blew my mind seeing this thing, because they haven't been reported in Sarasota in 6 years. There have been some reports recently from birders, but we were the first in 6 years, so that was pretty cool. But anyways, about a week later, after seeing that guy, he scurried off into the brush. About a week later, I was just across from the key. This was taken on the clapper. It was seen on Siesta Key. I was just across from the key in an area of the bay, and I start hearing this really weird trilling call, and I'm like, that's not like anything I've ever heard before, and I'm wondering what it could be. It's like it's fall time. What's calling? And ended up being a clapper rail, and it could very well be the same one. They were both breeding adults, just like right across the water. The saying there's never been a sighting, but not confirm whether it's the same one. But anyways, I see this thing going through the marsh, through these mangroves back and forth, and just to show how some bias of being there in the situation affects your edit. Even while I was shooting it, I was thinking how cool it was that this bird was very secretive. It would run from cover to cover to get behind the mangroves. Just a little patch of red mangroves. There's not many patches of red mangroves left in my area, but it was just running from patch to patch just to get out of cover. I was thinking how unique it was, how secretive this bird is. This mud chicken, as hunters like to call them, mud hens. Awesome birds if you ever get the chance to see them. But I'm thinking how secretive this bird is, how unique it is, how it doesn't want to be seen. And I knew that with my edit, I wanted to bring out that secretiveness, the darkness of the habitat, and how it only comes out in the open once in a while and just runs across. So I definitely let that influence my edit, my experiences with the bird, and it made it a more special image to me. So on to the bringing out what you like and pushing back what you don't like. Like I said, my favorite aspect of the image, dark and secretive. I just think that's the coolest thing. How it there's these dark patches, the reds in the mangrove. I love the red mangroves. I think they're just the coolest. I definitely think they're the coolest mangrove. There's white, black, and red, I think, mangroves. But I knew just in person I wanted to bring out the red of the mangroves. The mangrove leaves themselves, this is how nitpicky I can get. They just feel slightly yellowish to me. And just considering that it was in a shadow, it was dark, the whole scene was dark, I really felt like those needed to be a slightly more blue hue in my final product. So that's something I took into account with my edit. Another thing is clapper rail beaks are red, and I like to analyze good ID shots on Google before editing a photo of certain images if it's in low light, because sometimes you don't always have enough information to properly process a photo of a bird. So I'll use these ID photos to get a good idea of what the bird's supposed to look like. Especially with a file like this, it felt very dark and drab. So I looked at some ID photos, and just gonna blitz through the things I disliked. I disliked that the black felt a little soft. Like I said, the green hue, and that white stick in the bottom left quadrant really stands out, draws attention away from the bird. I knew pretty much instantly I was going to clone that. So now we're going to take a look at the finished product. So as you can tell, I brought out some of the blues in the bird and in the leaves. This is pretty much how I remember it exactly in my mind. Of course, there's going to be some mental bias from and some distortion because it's been a while since I was there, but this is pretty much an accurate representation of how I remember it. As you can tell, I brought out some of the reds in the beak. We can have very red beaks, but that bringing out the red in the beak was important because it complements the red of the mangroves. And the blues in the bird were also brought out a little bit. They're not always super blue in person, but this one was a breeding adult. But since it was in the shadow, it would make sense to have some blue tones on it. So I definitely incorporate some blues very heavily throughout the photo. And the white distraction is gone. And a few other little distractions are gone or limited. So another very linear take on editing. Just trying to make it more feel like a very secretive bird, because that's really what it was in person. So my experience definitely affected the outcome of my photo. So since I talked about distractions, in cloning and removing stuff, I had to dedicate a slide to it because I can't leave you guys hanging like that. I'm not that kind of person. So this graphic here, the reason why I include this is a baby barred owl, great little owl. He stood there for a couple days before fledging. He would obviously go down, but he would stand there by the edge, getting ready to fledge, stretch his wings. So I got this image early in the morning. But the image on the left shows these red circles are things I did end up cloning. And on the contrast, the image on the right, that's the final product, are things that, looking back on the image, I definitely could have cloned. And they would make sense to clone, but I decided not to. And I'll go over the reasons why I decided not to in just a second. The tools that I wanted to outline are the clone stamp tool and the Photoshop spot healing brush tool. I use it on the content aware feature. I find that's the best. But so going back to these red circles, what's hard to determine when you're a photographer is how far you can take your edits, how far you can take your clones, especially. And with this one, for example, I took down those three things. I cloned those out and I changed the crop a little bit. But deciding not to clone out the ones in the yellow, how do you decide that? It's a tough thing you have to ask yourself. And a trick I use, I squint when I'm looking at an image. I have a background in wildlife art, so a lot of the methods I use are things I did when I did commission work and such, just to get the perfect results for the client. And perfection was really everything, and I've taken that a lot into my photography, is just trying to get things perfect. Over the top, a lot of times I go over the top with stuff, and I'm told that, but I enjoy it. So the reason why I didn't clone up things on the right is because when I squinted, they really didn't take my attention away from the bird. They didn't feel like they were imposing elements, whereas the one crossing the bird definitely had to go. And that the two large specks, since they were so far away from the bird itself, they felt like they kind of weighed the image down. I kind of wanted I wanted those sticks to kind of trail up a little bit. And I felt like they impacted the feel I was going for. And of course, if I were to edit this again, I'd probably make different decisions. But those are the decisions I made when I edited it. I could still clone those things out just to make it perfect, but just for the sake of keeping it as natural as possible, I left those few things in yellow in. Well, I've said this a few times throughout the presentation, but I'm really not going for talking about technical, but I am happy to explain what I mean by certain things, like the clone stamp tool, spot healing tool, how to use them, when I use them. Afterwards, just type those in the chat box. Especially with the clone stamp tool, I mean, that tool is an art. It's so tough. I'm so bad at it. I do my best, but I have a lot of people help me out, a lot of great photographers, but it takes a lot a lot of practice to get good at the clone stamp tool. Getting rid of stuff, knowing how to work your opacities. It's really difficult sometimes, but if you know how to use it right, it could be a great asset just for perfecting your compositions and getting rid of just little things. So I definitely recommend, even if you go light on your editing, you like to keep things natural, maybe try cloning little things here and there. I find it helps me to appreciate an image more myself. Just looking at an image, especially that I've taken, I know people won't all the time notice if you like share it on social media or anything, but it does help me to appreciate an image more myself, knowing that little imperfections are gone. And because with any artwork, you're always going to be your worst critic. So sometimes you just can clone stuff like that just for the sake of being happy with the image yourself. So now on to pretty much the most important aspect of editing. As you edit, you make decisions about what to change after the fact of editing, after the fact of taking the photo. That's the whole point of editing. But when we edit, we're not only helping our images to reach their max potential, taking your raw file exactly where you want it to look very pleasing or whatever, but you're also learning how to do it the next time. You're learning, for instance, with those images we walked through, all those little things, some of them were changeable, some of them were fixable. For instance, with the palm warbler, just moving slightly left to get rid of that stick. That's something with a similar composition. I might notice that next time and might move over and get rid of it. So editing, it's a time for scrutiny. It's a time to look deeply into your images and to change things that don't exactly hit you. And the time we spend editing, it's invaluable for improving ourselves as a photographer. A lot of times photographers will say to spend a lot of time in the field, but sometimes you just need to spend time looking at your images, analyzing your gallery, what things you might want to do a little bit better. Something I've always found very beneficial. It's similar to editing, whereas you're analyzing photos, but looking at some of my favorite photographers, their galleries, people who I really appreciate what they're doing style-wise, not for the purpose of imitating their style, but to find unique takes they've had on things. And it's a great inspiration, and it has a similar effect to editing. You'll look at images for a long time and things will hit you that you didn't exactly see before. For instance, with this barred owl chick on the right, this little guy, with this image, I overexposed the sky a little bit. I actually got a new wide angle lens to fix that. But something that after this image and a few others, I learned that it's so important with a wide angle to underexpose. It's something I wouldn't have learned otherwise if I had just taken the image, maybe just scrapped it, or just kind of ran with it and think about it. But actually analyzing how the sky is, it's not underexposed, it's not overexposed in this version, but it is close. And I have messed up a few images that way, wide angle images, by overexposing the sky. So I learned to underexpose images a decent amount when shooting wide angles in the forest, especially with the color contrast. I went on a tangent there. So editing, taking that time to scrutinize your photos. A lot of times in the past, I had gone through entire trips of images. I'll have like 4 or 5 trips, and I'll pan through them, choose my favorites, edit them up, send them through. But looking at images that were almost successes, analyzing what I did wrong, because sometimes, especially with shooting in dense environments, the difference between a good image and a bad image, bad meaning, of course, is subjective, bad meaning not as good as the good. Sometimes just a matter of moving over a foot. I had a recent experience with the barred owl where just moving over a foot to the left, I was looking at a video I took with my phone of the scene. I realized that the reason why I completely blew the opportunity is I had to be a foot to the left. It's something that if I ever encounter this specific owl in this area or a situation similar, I'll know what to do next time. And that's a really a big thing about photography, is building on past knowledge. And editing is a great time to do that. Even if you aren't pushing your images a lot, just push yourself with your images. Try to look past the image itself and see the thought process behind it and how to change it next time. So moving on with this idea, recently I experienced pretty much the epitome of the benefits of editing and teaching yourself. I was down sort of by your guys' neck of the woods, a little bit south. I was in Homestead. I went there twice recently, and 3 times actually. I went down and I saw some burrowing owls. That little guy in the bottom middle. In the first 2 visits, I went down there to see these guys. If anyone's ever shot burrowing owls, you know that the entire day they sit at their burrow right at the entrance. During midday they go under, but they don't leave that area, and they just stay there. And then sunset comes and they start moving, they start hunting. So there's really not many opportunities other than the bird in the spot. All you can do is move around it. So I felt very limited with my photography. I was having such a difficult time. And when I got home, I had edited 2 trips worth of burrowing owls, a total of about 1,600 images, like 7 days of going out. And I didn't like any of them. I hated all the images, and it was sad. It was really sad. But I spent that time, those next couple days, analyzing what I did wrong, scrutinizing what I did wrong, seeing not how I could fix them with the editing, but fix them in person next time. And it ended up working out really well. I was super distraught from it. I had wasted a lot of time on a lot of life on my camera. But the next time I went back and I shot the burrowing owls 2 nights as opposed to mornings. I realized that the nights had a better feel to them, with the lighting and all. And I went back and I realized what the best aspects of my images were from my editing. And I ended up pulling down 4 images I liked within the 2 days. Significantly better success. The birds didn't do anything differently. They just stood at their burrow. But I realized how to approach the scene differently by analyzing the images. And I think it has left an impression on me when it comes to editing, understanding the importance of it, not just being not being a crutch, but being a creative tool, with your mind especially. So that's my story about the importance of editing. These 2 images I incorporated, I just felt like they'd be interesting to. What's I just dropped my earbud? They'd be interesting to mention. Is the white ibises clashing in the top left. With this particular image, I had spent a couple days at the mudflat shooting these ibis and great egrets, and it's a regret of mine because this image is one that I don't like it very much because I pushed it too far, in my particular opinion. From the raw file, I feel like I pushed it too far. So it's one that I didn't quite understand the importance of just going back and reshooting. It's an image that came out well overall. I mean, I like the overall aesthetics, but it taught me a lot about the importance of going back and reshooting as opposed to re-editing. And this one on the right, it's another image that it's an example of getting a fresh take. It's an image that it's now one of my favorites. This baby sandhill crane. It's the only time I've ever shot sandhill cranes. There's a whole story behind this particular session. This isn't like a neighborhood. People were giving me weird looks. But this little sandhill crane, I had shot it and I had edited it through, and I didn't like any of them. I was mad about all of them. So I walked away for maybe 2 months, and then finally I went back to the image, just scrolling through my Lightroom catalog. It's a great thing about Lightroom is it organizes things chronologically. And a catalog, definitely recommend Lightroom and Photoshop to anyone who doesn't use those. But I had seen this image in my Lightroom catalog after a few months and ended up processing it. I didn't have to do too much to it, just a few layers of dodging and burning and such. but it ended up being one of my favorite images once I had gotten a fresh perspective on it. So I felt like those are two important images to share to wrap it up, because that is our last slide. We first came out to exactly an hour. I have a few closing remarks though. Once we're now that we're out of the screen share presentation, we talked about a few things we talked about just as a review. I felt like a review would be good. We talked about finding your own styles. We talked about how editing it can be as simple as just making it for bad exposure, ugly files. We also had a slide about we can get abstract and when it comes to enhancing the mood of a photo. Abstract's the wrong word, but we could take it a step further with enhancing mood of a photo using lights and darks. And if you want to take it a little bit further, you can work on the mood itself of I think I just repeated that. Working on the mood of a photo is also a very enhancing a mood as opposed to, what was the line I used? Enhancing the mood as opposed to changing the mood. That is and another interesting subtlety of editing. We looked at making our edits consistent and natural. It's something you can't possibly learn from a teacher or necessarily from anybody. It's something that just takes time, time in the chair working on your images. So it's important to, if you're in for keeping images natural, it is important to keep them undetectable and realistic. Subtle edits is something many wildlife photographers go for. And we had 5 slides in the concept of editing based on what you like and don't like. It's that line, pushing back, bringing out what you like, push back what you don't like, is pretty much the motto I use to always edit. I think of that in my mind. I just go for the edits from there. It's something I definitely recommend, making a list of things you like, don't like, because once you're done completing that list with your edits, a lot of times I've found, and I'm done with the edit there, I'm happy with it. So it's a very linear thought process. And lastly, we talked about how we can improve our skills through editing and not just improving individual photos. So that's all I have for you guys. Thanks so much for being a very attentive audience. And we can have some questions now, I think. If Nancy has any closing thoughts.
A couple of questions. One is, do you have an Instagram account where you post your pictures?
Yes, I normally after each presentation I type out my Instagram, my email. I'll do that now.
Great.
If anyone has any questions about specific tools, I also offer workshops in the Sarasota area for different bird photography targets. Just a morning out shooting. Let me just type out my Instagram account.
Great.
Just to tag that so you guys can keep connected with me. There's my Instagram. And then my email. It's very appropriate for bird photography. cbird012@gmail.com. So feel free to send me any emails, any questions, comments, concerns. I'm happy to answer any.
And another question, how did you deal with lighting the owls when you were shooting in the nighttime?
Great question. I personally don't ever choose to, I never choose to use unnatural, there are some photographers that are totally cool with using flash on owls, and some people consider it an ethics concern, but I don't get involved in issues like that. I personally don't use it for different reasons, like flashes or anything, but I find that a tripod is my best friend when shooting owls at night. I'm able to drop down to 3-second shutter speeds, and those can allow for plenty of leeway with shooting at night. Like for example, that burrowing owl image with those pieces of bokeh in consecutive, that was a combination of technically an unnatural light. It was a combination of street lamps and just a bit of glow, and there's just enough to get about 1/20th of a second with my camera and shoot. So just having a stable hand and yeah, planning out your shots. Owls, they can pretty much freeze and not even move
Mhm.
when they're just sitting there. It's the coolest thing. So you can really you can stop your shutter speed down a lot and shoot at night.
What f-stop did you tend to use with those?
Sorry, I missed that.
The f-stop?
Yeah, I personally shoot a lot of my owls with my 500 millimeter f4. So
Uh-huh,
I just drop down the f-stop as low as possible.
sure.
When shooting at night, of course.
Mhm. So it's a prime lens.
Yes.
Let's see, we had some questions coming up here. Are any of your workshops virtual?
Good question. I don't have any virtual up right now. In person in the field workshops are what I have, but since it's not exactly the right client for it with COVID and all, but yeah, none are virtual at the moment, just these. I give presentations to different clubs like yours just around, so you can find me at those.
So do you have other topics that you do presentations on?
I do. I'm trying to think of what my list is. I do one on artistic wildlife. That's in 6 days. I'm giving that one. I give one on
And
creative
what kind of wildlife? I missed that.
artistic wildlife.
Oh, okay.
I could actually pull up my list really quick.
Okay, great.
Urban wildlife photography.
Yeah, and then there's urban wildlife photography. That's a really interesting presentation. I do one on sensor cleaning, but then half the presentation there, since it's not a very long topic, half the presentation is just based on just some various adventures I've had recently and images and such, just to fill out the time, you know. I have an owl presentation as well, about finding and photographing owls, since that's a who doesn't want to see an owl, and there are a lot of unique tips in that presentation. And then one on backlighting.
Great.
That's my full list.
So it's a good list. So if we wanted to engage you for one of these other ones, I can get in touch with you.
I'm happy to come back if you guys weren't bored to tears.
No, I don't think so. I do have one comment here I'd like to read to you. An excellent presentation, Caleb. Very informative and well organized. Great advice and beautiful images. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I put a lot of work on my presentations, and I'm glad you appreciate them. It's nerve-wracking for me, but I try to pull through, and your questions, I really appreciate those.
And
Those that everyone's listening
yeah, and the longer you
and not
do
and not
this,
falling asleep.
no. Here's another one, a wonderful, professional and informative presentation. Caleb, I enjoyed that very much. While listening to you, it's hard to believe you're only 17.
Thanks so much.
Okay, another one. Thanks, Caleb, for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. From Joanna.
Thank you.
I'll keep going. If you would like to receive, let's see. Receive all AE group event information. This is to everybody else, I guess. To critique. That's too long for me. Okay, what I would like to say, just as well, if there's any more that are related to you, at the moment, great job. That was a great presentation. So a lot of appreciation. You did a great job. We enjoyed it. I'm sure everybody learned a lot. I really loved when you showed your raw image and then the different variations and then your final. I thought that was very helpful. Very well
Thank
done.
you. I always find that a little bit of transparency is sometimes important. I used to be very restricted with my raw files. I'd keep those to myself because I was sometimes a little bit apprehensive with how far I pushed images and such. But yeah, I really wanted to take this presentation from a more open perspective, since everyone edits differently. It's an artistic thing. So I changed it from the technical side of things to a more general approach to it, but with focus points. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that, and it wasn't a shot in the dark.
No, it was very good. Does anybody else have any more comments? Because if not, I'm going to turn it over to Gary. Because Gary, I believe, said he wanted to speak a little bit at the end. Is that true or not?
I said everything for the most part. I mean, I said everything most part in the very beginning, but someone asked for links for all the different webinars and seminars, which I did send to Nancy. There's one thing I forgot, so I'll send it tomorrow morning. You can send it out tomorrow. And then other than that, I just want to thank everybody for coming on for this presentation. And I look forward to doing more with the club. There's actually a couple questions that I have for Caleb that you guys might be interested in, but there's few. But I'm curious to know, Caleb, I've never asked this question to you before, but how much time do you take in when you capture a shot and you go home to the computer? How much time do you actually take and how much time does it take you to edit a photo? Does it sometimes take you half an hour, 40 minutes, 10 minutes? What's the average it takes you to edit a photo?
That is a good question. I do my best to sort of find a balance between editing and photography. Something I mentioned, but I didn't really expound on much, is knowing when to edit and when to reshoot, when to re-edit, when to reshoot. And lately I've been trying my best to lean more towards reshooting as opposed to re-editing. So recently I'd say I maybe spend, on some images, I might spend up to half an hour to an hour on just going back and forth, deleting it all, starting again, just to get it right where I want it. I get overly picky sometimes, but sometimes I've had edits where it only take me maybe 30 seconds. I look at it, I do a couple stuff, might delete that, and then just send it off to my phone where I can post on Instagram or do whatever with it. So it completely depends on the image, but it's mainly just my indecisiveness that makes images take forever.
Well, and there's another question. I think people should know about, but how much is it when you're shooting and you have, obviously people have expensive gear, they have mediocre gear. Some people can't afford the expensive gear or budget-wise. I mean, I know the answer, but I think I know the answer, but it's important for everybody to know too. How much is it about knowing your equipment, knowing how to use it versus having the most expensive gear? How much is it about that versus expensive gear?
I'm not going to give the traditional answer. I'm going to talk a little about this because this is something I care about. For a time, I had shot a 600mm f4. I got that when I was around 15, and really enjoyed that lens. But a lot of people would come up to me and say things like, "Your lens must take great photos," and things like that. Totally innocent comments. I'm not faulting them for it. And people would say, give comments about the lens doing the work, and it did bother me a little bit. It kind of got under my skin, so I pulled out the Canon T3i. It's an older modeled Canon lens, but I figure it's pretty much somewhat base level. It can take a decent photo, but it's not the most expensive gear. And I shot that for about a month or so with a kit lens, just a 70-300, to see what I got. And I see a difference. I shot, and I was very pleased by the end of the month. So I would say that good gear makes up for a lot of it makes up for errors with your photography. A low f-stop is great in the woods, but nothing beats just moving around and analyzing your scene. And nothing, the photographer itself is the most important thing by far, because it's the camera. It just takes pictures of what you see, and it's up to the photographer to point it right.
And then the last question I have is on RC, like like your generation, you're used to certain photographers where the camera club thing used to the Alpha Marses and like the people that have been the Art Wolves, and the people that have been around a long time. RC, I know you're a big fan of Ray Hennessy, but I'm not sure if anybody's heard of Ray Hennessy, but he's a great bird photographer. But who are some of your other photographers that you look up to, that you talked about earlier, that some of these folks on him may know about, may have a clue that they're actually around?
I'm always happy to plug great photographers. There's one photographer I'm appreciating his style a lot nowadays. Some of you might know him. His name is Brad James. He lives in Newfoundland. His style, a lot of times he will shoot the typical portrait, and I have a lot of respect for anyone who can perfect the portraiture style of bird photography. But he also gets artistic at times. Some of his images are perspectives that it makes me think for a second. I do really appreciate that about his work. Brad James. And I'm trying to think of, I could probably say one other since there's so many good ones. Can't just limit it to one. There's another photographer. His name's Marco. His last name starts with a G, and I cannot remember his last name for the life of me. But he's a master of the wide angle and the mid-range approach to wildlife. Something I really tried to imitate. Pulling out the wide angle and the mid-range more than the telephoto nowadays. A lot of influence from his work, but he's also a master editor, at least in my opinion. Marco GIA something, cannot remember his name, but love his work. A very cutting edge approach to wildlife photography.
Maybe you could email his name to me when you find it.
I'll type in the chat. Just gotta type it in Instagram really quick, and I'll find it.
Somebody said, could it be Marco Grassi?
No, I have it here. I can't pronounce his last name. I'm not gonna try.
I think I know who you're talking about. I think I follow him. He's GUN something. I know who you're talking. I think I know who you're talking about. But
I'm typing it in now.
Okay.
Love his work. Just a really unique perspective.
Oh.
I'd happily plug him any day.
I always find it wonderful to have new names and new images to look at. It helps. It just does. It wakes up your aesthetic and teaches you other ways to look at things.
Definitely. It's so easy to just get stuck in your own mind when you're taking photos. You can get so stuck in your own thought process, and you can really get into a rut and looking at other people's work, and it can kick you out of it and realize how much more there is to do when you're taking photos, and it can get you out of the house sometimes and into the field.
Definitely. So let's see. Sounds like we've got all the questions taken care of. I thank you, Gary, for your extra questions, and obviously for supporting and being a sponsor is really wonderful what you do. And we really appreciate it in our club.
thank you. So thank you.
And I wish one of your places was nearby so I could wander through it.
I know I get asked that question all the time. I asked my brother, when are we going to move us? I ask my brother all the time, when are we going to open up a hunt south? And he said, "You want to move to Florida? It's all yours. You can run it." But I get asked that all the time. If I could, but I honestly, I don't never want to run a store. I like what I do. I like the marketing. I like the, some of that, but dealing with the everyday, day-to-day people, that's not, in the retail thing, that's not for me. I like what I do, but I would have to get somebody to run it.
Well, luckily these days we have good catalogs, and
What?
guys, I know that I've heard you guys are a tremendous help when somebody's looking for something.
Yep, you can always contact me, email me. I am on Facebook. You want to follow me on Facebook? It's Gary Faber. I post on Facebook every day. I'm also on Instagram, and my Instagram is gfaber33. So you guys can follow me that way and keep up and with what I'm doing as well.
That would be great. If you could stick that in the email to me when you send,
Yes.
you were going to
Yeah.
send me something else.
Yeah, I'm gonna send you an update, and I'll throw my information on there as well.
Okay, that's great. So last but not least, everyone, I just wanted to remind them about next week when we're having a critique. The critique is going to be with Angel, myself, Dustin Angel, and you got to get your images into our software. You should have gotten a note out today. I think we sent an email out today with all the details. So we love participation, and hopefully you will send in images. If you have any trouble, the final deadline is on Saturday. I believe that's the 15th. And if you have trouble getting your images in, get in touch with us by the 14th so we can help you through it. And if there's any other questions, you know how to get in contact with us. I think that's about it. Natasha, are you still there? I think there she is.
I'm
Hi.
here.
Okay, anything to say that we didn't say, you think?
I don't think so. Just a reminder, tell all your friends about our Audubon Everglades photography group. It's a great opportunity to learn from great presenters like Caleb. Caleb, that was an awesome presentation. I don't know much about photography, and I was really enthralled by all your techniques and comments and everything. It was really interesting. So thank you so much for taking the time to present to us.
Thank you.
So yeah, tell all your friends how awesome we are. Join the group. And if there's no further questions, I think we can all just go ahead and call it an evening.
Yeah, thanks, Natasha. Goodbye, everybody. It was great. And just contact us. The email contact, I believe, is in the thing that we just sent out, the other email, and we'll get back to you. So have a great evening, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Take care.
Gary.
Take care. Bye, Caleb.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much, Caleb. It was awesome.
Yeah, great job.
Thanks
Yeah.
so much for having me. I
Yeah.
appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, guys, you can go
So
now.
you have to stop the recording, right, Nancy?
Oh, thank you. Oh, I thought
Oh,
that
dear.
would stop.